Hi, so welcome again, everyone, to the Mina Rees Library Conversation Series, bringing together librarians, faculty, scholars, and everyone in between. We typically host these on Thursdays at 1 p.m., although the next few are at 4 p.m., just to throw a small wrinkle in it. And the conversation series is inspired by pioneering mathematician Mina Rees, who the Graduate Center Library is named after. She was named CUNY's first Dean of Graduate Studies and also the Graduate Center's first president back in 1971. And today we have Sarah Lamdan, who is a professor at the CUNY School of Law. She specializes in government information access and transparency, and especially issues related to environmental law and environmental information access. She teaches legal research, advanced legal research, public institutions, and lawyer seminar courses. Emily Dravinsky is the interim chief librarian at the Mina Rees Library. She is the series editor for Gender and Sexuality and Information Studies from Library Juice Press, Litwin Books, and is also on the board of Radical Teacher. Her research interests include critical approaches to information literacy instruction, gender and sexuality in librarianship, and the intersections of power in library systems and structures. So feel free to make this conversational, as it can be over Zoom. Feel free to ask your question in one of two ways. You can either drop your question in the chat. Feel free to do that anytime, and we will scoop back to those. Secondly, if you'd like to ask your question live, feel free to use that raised hand feature. Just let us know that you'd like to speak, and we will come back to you. And again, thank you for joining us today. Coming up, we have a few other speakers. We have on Thursday, July 16th, Christopher Wilde, who co-founded the Queer Zine Archive Project, QZAP. Thursday, July 23rd, also at 4 p.m., we have Stina Soderling, teaches at Hamilton College, who'll be speaking about her research on queer land movements in the United States. So finally, thank you again for being here. And I will stop sharing my screen and pivot over to Emily. So thank you, Emily. Emily, you're muted.
Rookie mistake, I was muted. Sorry about that. So thank you so much for that great introduction to the conversation series, Elvis. And I'm so excited to have Sarah Lamdan here to share with us her research into the ways that our vendors use our data, which is not always for good. So Sarah, if you can unmute so we can have a conversation. Before you sort of get started on the formal presentation, I'd love to hear how you got interested in this area, and if you can just give us a little bit of framing about why is this something that you work on?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I see people that I know, and it makes me so excited. My amazing librarian colleagues. So I hadn't ever thought about this issue until 2017, when I saw an article about an extreme vetting day, like an invitational day that ICE held, where they invited tech companies to their headquarters to explain to them what kind of surveillance products they were going to be building and kind of encourage these companies to start developing those products. And I noticed that LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters were both listed as attendees, and I was like, why wait, like, I know them, and this program sounds horrible. Why are the companies that I deal with all the time participating in this? And so I started doing research, and 3 years later, I'm still doing the research and only learning more and more about kind of our vendors' involvement in surveillance activities.
As you do your research, does the picture get lighter and breezier?
No.
No.
No. Yeah, I kind of assumed it would, because I tend to be kind of, I don't assume that things are super extreme until somebody shows me otherwise. And one thing I found really surprising is the more research I've done, just the more startled I am by the amount and variation of data that these companies are actually starting to collect, and how these companies are changing, to the point where I'm actually writing a book about it called Data Cartels. And that's my summer and fall project. But it's basically kind of where I'm trying to lay out all the stuff that I'm learning about library vendors and the data companies we use.
Great. Well, I think we're all super excited to talk more about it. So I'll let you, I'll mute myself and let you share your screen so we can listen to your presentation.
Great. And I'm going to share a few slides just to kind of give an overview, and then we'll have a conversation. So feel free, as Emily and Elva said, just feel free to like post questions in the chat, and yeah, in like 10 minutes we can talk about all of it. So let me see. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can y'all see all good? Awesome. Okay. So before we have a conversation, I wanted to kind of make sure that we're all in the same factual space about what is going on and what library vendors are up to these days. And I decided to just kind of title the slides, "Hey there, you're paying to put police in your library collections," because that's kind of where we are today with some of our library vendors. And that is because since the 90s, our library vendors have been transitioning from kind of academic and research databases to becoming these huge data analytics corporations. So they're reframing their work and they're actually changing what they do. So I ask at the bottom of the slide, what does this mean? This is kind of the outline that I have been building for the last year or two. And it is, I call this kind of the lay of the land of the data cartels. So these data companies have started just hoarding as much data as they can in various sectors. And when you look at this, you can kind of see our products kind of laid out, right? Like legal information, academic research, personal data, news and financial information. Like we all have databases in our libraries that supply all of this stuff. And it's strange when you think about it, but they're all kind of related to Thomson Reuters, RELX Group, and a couple of other major data corporations. And that's becoming more and more true as the companies kind of buy each other up, split off, and they keep kind of changing into, you know, different molecules of data in a way, different little bubbles of data that are all bent towards getting different kind of profits from different markets. And the background of this isn't old. This is a phenomenon that's only really been happening since the 90s. In the 90s, a couple of companies began buying databases. So information started going online and becoming kind of this binary code that could be more easily bought and sold and traded and combined. And a few companies realized that, and they started to make these huge conglomerates. You know, like Thomson Reuters bought, well, Thomson and Reuters joined, which was, you know, a news and a publishing company. And then they bought a huge legal information database system. And then they started buying personal data systems. And similarly, Reed Elsevier, which was a huge academic publisher, got together with LexisNexis, which was a huge personal data and legal information publisher. And they started buying more and more data, right? They bought journals from Elsevier, and they bought personal and legal data from LexisNexis. And LexisNexis was buying like ChoicePoint and Accurate and these data products. So all of these companies started really consolidating and becoming huge corporations that had all sorts of different types of information under their umbrellas. And I wanted to show you briefly, this is just from Wikipedia. This is just a quick little list of all of the acquisitions that RELX made from 1993 to 2018. And you can see it really spans, like Seisint is a law enforcement surveillance corporation. Harcourt, you know, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich is academic publisher. They've since actually split off that business, but they owned it for a long time. Matthew Bender, which was a legal publisher, all sorts of other, an anti-money laundering company, and just all sorts of different types of data corporations. Similarly, between 2008 and 2019, Thomson Reuters has I think acquired and combined business with, over 200 data companies. And that's everything from personal data, financial data, security information, personal data. So these corporations have really been changing, and we've all felt that as librarians, right? I remember when Thomson Reuters bought Westlaw, like that was a huge deal, right? And when LexisNexis bought Matthew Bender, like law librarians were really concerned about all of these changes. And that's been true across, all specialty libraries, all general libraries. We've all felt the difference in our vendor relations over the last, 2 or 3 decades. So that's not imaginary, which to me raised the question, like, why are vendors doing this? Why are we seeing these changes happening? And a lot of it is because of the shift from print collections to our new database collections. We all feel that too, right? We see that happen all the time. And computer-assisted research is also becoming kind of a more open access affair that doesn't depend on these corporations so much. It used to be that if you wanted to find a reliable secondary source, you would have to go onto Westlaw or Lexis, or you'd have to get EBSCO or whatever if you wanted to get a journal article. But now we're starting to see a lot more open access publishing, which is great. It's great for the scholarly community and the research community, right? We can get important scientific and legal ideas in journals without having to rely on these gigantic corporations and their paywalls. However, that makes this business less lucrative for them, so they're changing their business model. And finally, overall, data, research, and information is becoming more of a wholesale affair. So I think of it as, let me make sure that this doesn't mix. Yeah, I think of it as kind of a Costco model. This is what I always imagine our publishers to look like. If I could visualize their database system, it's this these economy-sized vats of data, right? Like think of a huge, big old pack of mayonnaise, or one of those like aluminum foil things where they've like put together 20, cases of aluminum foil and you can buy all of them. And they've been doing that with our data because they can then sell that data in big deals, right? We all have big deals with certain publishers that are really expensive and can, hamstring our libraries. But the reason they can make these big deals is by amassing as much data as they want. And there's some really important data in there, right? They're like really high quality journals that are peer reviewed and very, that have a cutting edge research. But then it's also like kind of spun in with just a bunch of junk and derivative stuff and maybe stuff that isn't as well reviewed. And they kind of just tie it all together and they force us to buy it all, right? So it really is this wholesale model. It's no longer like you can just buy Nature from the people who publish Nature, or you can just buy a Matthew Bender publication. You can just buy one of them. Like remember the good old days where you could just like buy one set of court reporters and just that was it? You can't do that anymore, right? You have to buy a huge database that has all sorts of stuff in it. And the corporations admit as much. So this is, I think, a really telling little quote from RELX Group. Sorry, I'm trying to, there we go. They say that, while they were once big publishers, they're transforming their revenue streams and managing down their print sales to just 10% of their dealings. And they even are working to get themselves renamed on like financial websites and trading services. They're trying to become business services companies instead of being like media groups or publishers. So they really are conscientiously and purposely changing their business models. And the reason that they can do this largely is because everything is datafied now, right? It used to be that we had all these different sets of books and we had audio recordings and we had, VCR tapes with videos on them. And now all of that stuff is sold as data, right? And then also we have the Internet of Things, which allows us to datafy more and more stuff. So everything is becoming datafied, which makes it much more easy to turn to a wholesale model and to treat all of these different data types and different products like they're the same. So that's what RELX and Thomson Reuters and other vendors are really capitalizing on. It's the datification of everything, the way we're turning everything and funneling everything into this kind of binary code that can just be chunked together on a single, USB drive or, hard drive or data server. And I wanted to show you, because I think this is interesting, I'm going to show you 3 different Reed Elsevier products. And I think if you're like me, you'll notice something about them. So this is LexisNexis's academic research tool. This is LexisNexis's legal research tool. This is LexisNexis's police surveillance and law enforcement tool. They all look exactly the same, because everything has been funneled into this binary that's Costcoized, that's packaged and repackaged. There's no difference. And they don't want it to look different to the user. And they will package it so that you can get your risk solutions with your legal databases, with your academic databases. They will slice and dice the data however you want. And another thing that's happening with these corporations is they love to corner a market. So they're expanding to monetize more of our academic and legal and professional work. So in the olden days, the publishers, the traditional role of publishers was to take money and to work in the publishing process part of our academic world, right? We would do the research, we would do all kind of the academic work, and then we would send our stuff off to publication. And that's where our journals would get involved. And that's where kind of the stuff that would eventually get sold to libraries would be made. And then the libraries would archive it, and the libraries would decide how to curate our collections and where to put things when they were old, right? How to archive things. However, in the new model, the publishing companies have monetized every piece of the academic puzzle. They're trying to digitize and monetize not just the publishing process, which is that slice you see in the middle, but they also have pre-publication and research sites where they monetize our research. And then they are the ones who now have the databases that we own as librarians. We don't own anything. We rent, we license these huge databases from the corporations. So they also own the post-publication process and the curation and kind of resting place of all of our research and all of the information that we give to our patrons. So we've gone from this to this, right? There's a lot more that they can monetize. And what I've learned, the most disturbing thing I've learned from my research is that in addition to monetizing academic work, they've also monetized policing work. So this model isn't nearly as like cute as the other model because I made it and I'm not so good at this stuff. But it starts, to me, there's a cycle where they've cornered the market on law enforcement surveillance and then also push that market forward. So you see, we buy what Westlaw, Lexis, Reed Elsevier, what have you, and we give them research and data, right, up at the top of the little cycle. And then they take our money and maybe our data. The data is a little bit more questionable. I'm not sure what happens with data because it's hard to know what they're doing with our data because they don't tell us and because their algorithms are black box algorithms that are not transparent.
Hey, Sarah, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
When you say we give them our data, what data are we giving them?
Exactly. And that's what we're not sure of. So
okay.
Ostensibly, if we are logging into their product with our names and running different searches, we're giving them all of our research data, right? Like they have our search histories. They know everything we've looked at. They know every Reed Elsevier article that you've ever pulled down. In fact, they encourage you to start folders and share them with people, right? They are datifying our entire research process. The thing we don't know is if they're using it in other databases, if they're taking that data and reusing it. Westlaw and Lexis Lexis has claimed that they don't do that, but neither corporation has given us a written assurance that they don't do that. And it's especially problematic for lawyers and legal practitioners because our work product is supposed to be confidential, right? It would be very problematic if I did a bunch of legal research for a case I was doing representing immigrant clients in a criminal proceeding, and then Lexis was giving that information to ICE, right? That would be really problematic. And we're not 100% sure what is happening there. We don't know. And it's the same in any, like if you're using Lexis Academic, if you're using Reed Elsevier, we have a duty to our library patrons to not share that data with anyone. But right now there's a third party involved and we don't know who that third party is sharing the data with, which is problematic from kind of a library standpoint. But both of these corporations do millions of dollars of work with law enforcement. Thomson Reuters has over $30 million in contracts with ICE, and the data that they give ICE is put through their Palantir predictive policing systems. And similarly, Reed Elsevier, so Thomson Reuters really has the federal law enforcement market covered. So they have like ICE, FBI, federal law enforcement agencies. LexisNexis works with thousands of local police enforcement agencies, and they sell Accurate and other data sharing products among local state police, so non-federal law enforcement agencies. That's kind of how they've sliced up the pie of their law enforcement business. Reed Elsevier does state and local, and Thomson Reuters really does federal. So they sell tons of personal data for policing data surveillance. And they might use our data, we're not sure about that, but they definitely use our money to develop these products, right? They definitely use the millions of dollars of contract fees that libraries pay and that Westlaw and Lexis users pay. That definitely goes into the R&D for their police surveillance products. So when they go to like an ICE investor day for the extreme vetting program, the money that they're going to use to fund the R&D that they do in their technology labs is going to come from Westlaw and Lexis, or excuse me, Westlaw contracts, or Lexis if Lexis gets the contract. So that's what I mean. They're cornering the market on personal data. They're the biggest law enforcement data brokers, and they are they're doing, so they take our money and data, they develop these law enforcement products, and then those law enforcement products are used to make more legal clients, right? The more surveillance dragnets there are, the more people get caught up in them, the more people need legal representation. So then the lawyers that represent those people who are caught up in the surveillance dragnets use Westlaw and Lexis to do their work, which creates this cycle where there's more Westlaw and Lexis use, there's more money being pumped into the product, and then that product is being used to make more and more legal clients. So that's that cycle. And here is an example of a piece of a contract that Thomson Reuters has with ICE. And I really just show it to demonstrate to demonstrate, how many different types of data Thomson Reuters sells. And this is just one of Thomson Reuters' contracts. They sell a lot of different types of data, but even in this one contract, they sell FBI numbers, state identification numbers, jail booking data, credit history, insurance claims, your phone number account information, your wireless phone accounts and all that data, wire transfer data, driver's license and other license data, vehicle registration information, property information, payday loan information, incarceration data, employment address and data, individual taxpayer identification number data, and employer records. And that's just one contract. They have thousands of data points about us. One librarian in Wisconsin, Shay Swager, he actually requested all of his data from Thomson Reuters, and he got a 41-page document back just full of data, and it was riddled with errors because this data is imperfect by its nature. Like, we've all got a report about ourselves from one of these companies and seen, oh, they have the wrong address, or oh, that wasn't me, or I never had a license for that, and that all gets swept in to these bundles that law enforcement use to surveil us. So, and as far as problems go, I'm sure as librarians, we can all imagine what those problems are. The first problem that really arises when our vendors sell data to law enforcement is a data privacy issue, obviously. We are selling and sharing our data to private companies, and those private companies are sharing it with other private companies, and then also sharing it with the government who's surveilling us. And it also causes data access issues that I think we're all keenly familiar with, right? When there is a monopoly on who owns information, we have a lot harder time dealing with library vendors. They embargo publications, make it harder for us to get things. They put huge paywalls on things, and they force us to pay a lot of money for things that shouldn't cost as much as they do. They starve universities of millions of dollars of budget, and libraries have to make this really difficult choice of having a robust collection or being able to hire librarians and maintain their public spaces that are also really important. And it also creates fewer access points for data. It limits our ability to access data when the only game in town are these huge data analytics corporations. Police and big tech, it's becoming more and more clear that they work together and that policing relies on tech surveillance for a lot of what it does. So as we think about abolishing and defunding police and kind of getting maybe law enforcement out of our libraries, it's really important to look at our vendors and look at our collections. That was kind of my main point in wanting to talk to all of you today, is like to get us thinking about the ways that our contracts with vendors might be bringing police into our library. I wanted to also point out, it's really hard for us to talk about this in forums unlike these, because like the ALA and AALL and other library organizations, our professional organizations, they work hand in hand with the vendors, right? And they are supported in large part by the vendor. And they are not necessarily the right environment for having these conversations. I put this here because in 2017, after I read that article, me and one of my colleagues, a library colleague named Yasmin Sokar Harker, we wrote a blog post about like, oh, hey, law librarians, this is a problem we should be thinking about. And the post was taken down within minutes of going up on the American Association of Law Libraries website. And we found that AALL, our professional organization, is not a place that welcomes this kind of critique about our vendors. So we have to be creative in the ways that we deal with this issue. But there are some things we can do. We can talk about our contracts and try to get the companies that we buy our research products from to end non-disclosure policies so that we can more openly talk about our contracts and what those look like and what they're doing. Because right now we have trouble even discussing our contracts with other librarians, which is problematic. We can supply our own contract language, right? We can go through and say, okay, I agree to this provision, but not this provision. And I know there are a lot of people at CUNY who are working on this, like Megan and other excellent librarians are really into this kind of contract language form of activism and negotiation. We can make system-wide agreements about privacy and policing in our institutions, which I know we're working on at CUNY too. Kind of as an institution, a university or a public library institution or whichever type of institution you are, what will we stand for as far as protecting our patrons' privacy? What will we stand for when we choose vendors? We can also divest from companies that engage in activities that we don't support. And if we don't feel comfortable divesting, like I know a lot of people have trouble thinking of working at a law school where there's no Westlaw, right? We can point out and push against bad practices and ask our reps why their company isn't doing better. And that's it. I'm open. That's the overview.
Sarah, thank you. Although I have to say, I experienced your presentation as kind of a big, scary bummer. So I would love the opportunity to take questions from the group. We've got an active chat going. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, just use the raise your hand button and I will call on you. I want to ask, I'll start us off with the first question. The sort of spidering, the sort of like network, the way that all of these things are intertwined makes it difficult for me to see a way out, right? So your slide of all of the things we can do, the sort of, I'm thinking back to your earlier point that if we give money to Elsevier, they will use that money to do research into better surveillance. So like, given that, do you have, like, if there was one thing you were going to do to sort of disrupt this, what would it be?
No, that's a really good question. And I think that especially in the law librarian community, that's where we've kind of gotten stuck. Mm-hmm. Like, we all admit that this isn't great, but we also feel so beholden to Westlaw and Lexis, and we depend on them so heavily that it's really hard to not know what to do. And honestly, that last slide is one I added because a law librarian, Nicole Disluski, who I love, she said, you cannot leave librarians without options of positive action we can take. Because I used to just give a similar presentation, be like, oh, that's it. That's all I got.
See ya. Yeah. We're doomed.
You're right. Sorry, guys. But I do think that there is a lot. Like, I think that it's different for all institutions because I think that all institutions have unique problems. Like, I think the luck, because at CUNY, I feel like it's easier to kind of get the message of problematic. I feel like that's an easier sell at CUNY than some other institutions. But even then, you have to think about, I don't know, like like in my personal institution, I think when I first brought this up, people were like, well, we rely on Lexis completely or Westlaw completely. We're not prepared for this. And so I suggested that maybe like, let's think of over the next 5 years, if in 5 years from now, we can make it a goal to be more prepared. Or if we feel like we'll never be prepared, is there a way we could tell Westlaw and Lexis how unhappy we are with these decisions? So I don't think there's just one form of activism, but I don't think that ignoring it in silence is the right form of response.
Yeah, that sounds right. I want to, Jordan, are you here and up for sort of maybe unmuting and sharing? I'm pulling from the chat where you say, I wonder if, or hope movements to defund the police would influence big deal cancellations. I wonder if you could say more about the connection you're seeing between those two, not to put you on the spot.
So I just want to say, Emily, you mentioned that you didn't expect this to be as big bummer of a presentation as it was. My anxiety cues started to trigger on the flowchart of mapping the scholarly communications infrastructure. As someone who works specifically at the I spend so much of my career helping faculty understand these increasingly Byzantine and impossible to understand copyright and open access policies, which is a ton of mostly emotional labor, as I am apologizing for, but not necessarily being an apologist for these companies.
Okay. Yeah.
But the amount of our time that goes into this is unsustainable, and they just keep increasing their profit margins. And for me, it's just a general climate of exhaustion, but also as someone with a bit of a window into university labor organizing at the moment, it seems like a possible avenue I hadn't considered.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about this moment as one of possibility. I see you nodding, Tara.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I feel like what I've been doing since 2017 is like batting at a piñata and just waiting for there to be some sort of crack, waiting for something to happen. And I feel like this moment is the moment where I have seen the most forward motion, or the most potential for forward motion.
Okay, thank you. That like lifts the sense of a bummer for me a little bit. Liz Schiller, you had your hand up. Go ahead, Liz.
Sorry, you might hear a baby crying in the background. My daughter's here with me.
I love it. Great. I love babies. Make it cry for me.
So my question as to the possibility of real alternatives has mostly been my students are very interested. When they hear about this, they want to know, especially the ones that might be inclined to care about social justice and things like that. They want to know, but for law students, there really isn't an alternative. You have to have some basic competence with Lexis and Westlaw. So I do teach a course that's about different free and low cost legal research tools, diversifying your research beyond Lexis and Westlaw, that type of thing. But my question, I guess, mainly for Sarah, but for anybody who has insight into this, you talked about the black box algorithm being part of the problem because we don't really know what they're doing with our data. In terms of alternatives, what do you think about the available sort of third service alternatives? Not necessarily the scholarly stuff, but the things that lawyers use in practice, Fastcase, for example, which does have a responsive product. So obviously they're taking some kind of data with their search results and they're improving their product based on our search results, but they've been open about revealing what their algorithm is. You can actually get in there and play around with it. When we're evaluating alternatives or asking Lexis and Westlaw maybe to do something other than what they're doing now, what do you see as the better options on the market in practice tools specifically?
No, that's a great question. And first, your baby is so cute.
It's like unbelievable.
Yeah, right? And it's
Hi,
so
baby.
cute.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Emily. Hi.
She's, what are you doing with me? Oh, look, no, you're into it.
Yeah, she loves Zoom, but she hasn't really met a lot of people in real life yet. So.
Oh, God. So as far as your question, I think that I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I think the answer is twofold. I think first off, a lot of these kind of startups or newer products are hopeful. And I think one of the most important things to do, even if case text and fast case aren't there yet, I think we have to support them. And I think we have to treat them like they will be there someday and really foster them. Because I think one of the things that's such a reliance and a monopoly with the Westlaw and Lexis, the duopoly that they have is we don't allow other products as much space. We don't let them in. And I think if we don't let them in, they're not going to grow. It's like a plant, we have to give them space and sunlight and support. So I think supporting the newer products is important. And I think that Fastcase, like you said, and Susan mentioned in the chat, like Fastcase plus Ross, and case text citator projects that they're working on, those are really hopeful. And if one of them were to prove to be as robust as anything that Westlaw and Lexis has, I think we're on. I think when I heard a couple years ago that case text had a citator, I was like, that's it. We can go. We can now put our full force in, supporting this company, because the only thing nowadays that Westlaw and Lexis has that the other products don't is a citator. Because secondary sources, Google Scholar has everything we need. And there's Google Scholar plus that search engine that looks at law firm memos. There is so much good material just for free online that I'm not as interested in Westlaw and Lexis secondary sources anymore. And their secondary sources strangle all libraries. The amount of money we spend on all of them is absurd. It's absurd. And if we could say, peace out Westlaw and Lexis secondary sources, imagine how freeing that would be. But the one thing that they do have and that is really, really useful is their citator. So I think what companies should do is master the citator. And for everyone who's not a law librarian, a citator is a tool that tells you whether the law that you're looking at is good law anymore or bad law. They'll indicate it with a red flag or a stop sign if it's not good law. And citators aren't perfect, even Westlaw and Lexis is. So I think what we really need to do is encourage Fastcase and case text and other new products to build citators.
Cool, thank you.
I've always been just sort of stunned that legal information is so expensive since it governs all of our lives, but that's an aside. We've got a ton of great questions in the chat that Elvis is keeping track of, and we're going to try to get to all of them. Next up is Cindy. You had a question about licensing and pushback. Do you want to share that? Oh, can you unmute?
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering if there was a way that we could write more things into the license agreement and then share that information about how we wrote a license agreement, and then if they keep seeing it, that they'll, it would behoove them as part of their business to make changes. I don't know. Would that be something that, individually, but also work kind of collectively to do?
And I also wonder about what would be in the license, since you can't write into the license, could you write into the license? So the idea you write into your license, don't share our data? Yeah,
can you say we won't, okay. I mean, if they see it enough, I'm just wondering if maybe they'll change it. It probably will take a lot to do it, but I'm just wondering if they keep seeing it over and over, would that be something that would make them change their minds?
Yeah, so I have heard, and we've had conversations about it, but Yale law, so there are a few, all law libraries have power as customers, but some kind of have power as tastemakers, they're from the largest law libraries with the most robust kind of collections. And one of them is Yale. And from what I understand, Yale tried to work with Lexis to make a memorandum of understanding, ensuring that at that law library, their data would not be, there would be a wall between their data and the other data. And what I would hope is that if enough libraries demanded this kind of language, then they would just come out with a statement promising that they don't do this. And that's what so that was my real first, and one of the reasons I ended up deciding to do more work is because it shocked me how hard this was to get. I asked Westlaw and Lexis if they would please put out statements promising that they're going to wall off, if they're going to firewall our research data, library data from surveillance product data, and neither company would just issue a statement or say on their website, we don't do this. Neither company will say that. The closest that's ever happened is that, I guess in the winter, there was some big action. A bunch of law students are starting to, come together and act, they're doing activist work on their campuses to try to stop all of this. And LexisNexis sent a email to all law school faculty, and I got it because I'm on their faculty listserv. I don't think librarians got the email. The email said basically like, there's one of our competitors, we're not going to say who it is, but one of our competitors works with ICE a lot more than we do, wink, wink. And, we don't do very much work with ICE. And we give free Lexis to ICE detention centers. So we're the good guys here. And then they said in the email, there was like one little sentence and they're like, and we don't share your data with ICE. And I'm like, okay, well, if you can write it in this email to faculty, why can't you just make a broader statement, just saying that to everyone? And why don't you put it on your website? And I don't know why they can't.
Because it's not true, don't you think? That seems right. Next, the next question is Will Dean. Would you like to share your thought about expanding education?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I like to think of myself as a pretty cynical person, and I was kind of surprised at the degree to collaboration that these database companies have. And I bet a lot of people, like it sounds like you just said that a lot of law students are already organizing around this, but I would just, maybe if we could expand the knowledge of how these collaborations, people at universities that fund it basically would be, motivated to organize a response.
Yeah, and so I think libraries are a great place to do this work, and student bodies, because obviously this is one of the few areas where librarians really are the gatekeepers. Like, these products are ours. We are the ones who do the biggest contracts. We're the ones who determine who gets it, who doesn't, what kind of packages we get. So we think there's a lot of power there. There's also a lot of power with workers who work inside of these companies and with shareholders. So I see Amanda Reinhardt asked in the chat about risks and risk management. There are now shareholder resolutions linking Thomson Reuters' work with ICE with human rights concerns. And more shareholders are starting to react and kind of join together to try to force Thomson Reuters to rethink its ICE connections, or to at least explain why the shareholder shouldn't be concerned about the human rights risks associated with doing that kind of business with ICE. So I think that there is a lot of room for kind of creative thinking and activism, stuff that I haven't even thought of yet, or at all, right? And I think even, like, no matter how cynical we get, we have to remember that as librarians and as students and as people who are both the people who formulate the contracts, and then also the customers who pay for the contracts, right? Student money is the money that is used to pay for these contracts. We have a certain amount of leverage, just like the shareholders do.
That's actually a nice segue to Vicky's question. Vicky, you asked, do you want to share your question about pushback from state institutions?
I mean, it's basically there. I just wonder how much more we are able to push back as a state institution versus private institutions. I feel like there is allegedly so much more transparency with, I'm using a lot of scare quotes these days, with how state money is appropriated. So I'm wondering if that conversation has happened or is happening, and like, what is kind of the response, private versus public?
So I've seen more freedom of movement among private institutions, but I'm not sure if that's because they're private or because they just generally, especially in the legal academy, it's a lot of private institutions that have more power. So I think they feel more comfortable kind of spreading their wings and like trying new things or going off the course of what the norm is. It's a really tough question because I think you're right. I think when you're talking about public institutions, it might be easier to demand certain amounts of accountability, but also policing is a public institution. So that's kind of another place where actually the alliance is a little bit different sometimes in ways that are surprising. You know, like in some ways it's harder to separate law enforcement from public institutions.
In particular, thinking about my institution, we are definitely known as a cop shop. And, you know, just kind of the ties with the city and how well-funded our police force is in Worcester, the city. It's all very challenging to detangle all of this. So I think, you know, I asked that question and then your answer, and then I'm kind of thinking, okay, and now Worcester State being a cop shop, also, how does that add another layer to all, you know, I feel like other state institutions would have more leeway or have more pushback or not get the same kind of, I could see a lot of our criminal justice faculty just being like, who cares? Of course they work with ICE. That's great, you know? So yeah, that's another layer of complexity with this.
Yeah, no, Thomson Reuters. So the guy who's the CEO of like Thomson Reuters, I think it's called like Security Strategies or something, TRSS, which is their policing product segment. He's on the ICE Foundation board, and he talks like McGruff, the crime-fighting dog. Like he is like, we help keep cities safe. Of course we work with ICE. Of course we work with law enforcement, right? So yeah, if you are in, like you said, like kind of a cop shop, pro-policing institution or police as a institution that is, you know, inextricably supportive of policing, you might see these connections as something positive. I know Thomson Reuters does. That's the way they frame it.
Jill Ciricella, you had a question?
Sorry about that. I was on mute. I sort of know the answer to this already because I've heard you speak about it before, but I was wondering if you would be willing to, in this forum, say a little bit about, not about, you know, your professional interactions with these companies, but how you as an individual researcher, the effects you felt of your research in this realm because of LexisNexis's reaction.
Wait, are you?
Sorry, that wasn't.
It's good to see you. Yeah, I think so. Do you want me to talk about like how it's affected my life?
I remember something specifically about how they contacted your students.
Yeah. So I've actually had. So I am lucky. I come from an institution that supports my work unequivocally. I actually transitioned roles and I'm no longer in my library, which actually in its own way is kind of heartbreaking, but it's not. It's a very complex situation, and I'm very grateful for the work I'm doing now, which I love. But when I started writing about this, so Westlaw and Lexis, these companies are very well moneyed. And something that they do with their money is they hire students to be their representatives and to like sell their product in the school and be there as a resource and a conduit of customer service in the school. Full disclosure, I was a Westlaw rep when I was in law school. What? Yeah, I like, they gave me all sorts of cool gifts and it was really fun. I went to a conference, but it's a very perky job. And one of the reasons they do that is to kind of embed themselves in the law school and the fiber and community of the law school. And when I started doing this work, a bunch of students reported to me, they wanted to let me know that our student reps had been told basically to monitor me and to talk to Lexis whenever I said anything about their work, or I said anything about their, you know, any ICE contracts or anything like that. So basically they tried to turn my students into spies, and they told my students who I taught, right? I teach them in law school. They told them that I'm a liar, and they tried to like kind of discredit me to my students. And then eventually they actually replaced we also have like professional full-time representatives that come to our school. These representative programs are there for a reason, and they're a big part of kind of their sales pitch and what they do. They replaced our rep who we'd had for decades with a different rep. And when I left the library and started working just in general faculty, they brought back the old rep who's with us again. So, yeah, that's true. It does sound like a very good pulp novel title. I'm into it.
Okay, so I'm having to prioritize questions because we're coming to the end of our time. So I want to ask Veronica. You had a question in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work in a law library. I work in an academic library, primarily in instruction. But I have I'm doing a lot of work right now with our research services team, and that image you posted of the kind of like spider web of where these companies are sort of injecting themselves throughout the research life cycle is really troubling, because I see how much our research services team is kind of struggling to embed the library in that research life cycle at our institution, and how because of budget cuts, like we aren't going to get any more people or resources. We didn't have a data management librarian until 6 months ago. And so like what's to stop faculty from saying, oh, you know, you guys are just getting set up and you don't have everything that I need, but Elsevier has this process from like nose to tail, right? Like it's got the whole thing. How do we keep up in academic libraries? I guess that's sort of where I'm struggling in the big scary bummer of things.
Yeah, and I think for academic librarians, that's a real problem and fear. And I know it's something that I felt acutely as a librarian. In law librarianship, we actually had a phenomenon, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, where either Westlaw or Lexis made ads where they basically encouraged lawyers to skip the law library. They were like, y'all, we have what you need. You can never see your law library again. And they were actually encouraging our patrons to not come see us anymore. Like, imagine how that feels. It feels great. You feel like you're really bonded closely with those people who you've signed away tons of money to. So I also think a lot of it comes to like you said, talking to faculty and being straightforward about what the ploy is here. When you look at that web, which by the way is part of a larger report that I can send, if anybody wants to know, I can send along that report. It's a really good report about how these companies are taking over the entire spectrum of academic work. I think if we clarify that to our faculties and say, hey, look, this is the game, and this is where this is where we are paying tons of money to take the power out of our institution and give it to these gigantic corporations. You know what I mean? Because it's a huge problem, and I think it's one that's invisible to people outside of libraries. Like, I think we talk about it a lot amongst ourselves, but we don't tell our patrons about it as much as we should, because I think it's shocking, and I think it should be shocking to any faculty who loves their institution or loves any institution, you know, that they've ever worked in.
It's tough, right? Because like the infrastructure slide, which you showed, and the monetization of each element of that was like, blows my mind, and I find it totally fascinating. But I imagine showing it to my historian girlfriend, and she would be like, I don't care. Can you just get me the book that I need? Can you open the libraries and scan my book that I need? You know, it's like, so it's difficult to sell to make people care about the means of production of their scholarly work. I think it's a
Right.
tough one.
And they've also hoodwinked us into placing our tenure and our popularity hopes into it. Like, law professors, if they don't have an SSRN page, they may as well not even exist, right? So yeah, they've really done a good job of selling it to faculties.
Amy Stempler had a question about FOIA. Amy, I don't know if you're still here, if you want to ask that question.
Thank you. Yeah, it was, I have no legal background, except I come from a family of lawyers and did work at Georgetown University Law Center for a while in another lifetime. But so my question was just, is there any way in terms of this unknown, what data are they sharing, etc., that there could be some type of FOIA request to identify what relationships they have with government agencies, which would obviously include law enforcement, ICE, etc.? It might be a stupid question.
So FOIA is like one of my favorite jams. I love talking about FOIA. Any of my first things here right now. But yeah, we recommend filing. So if you want to know more about contracts that law enforcement has with these companies, and contracts that public schools have with these companies, FOIA is a great place to start. One thing to note is there are federal contractor databases. You don't even have to file a FOIA request. You can find a lot of these contracts online on like Department of State websites for state level contracts, and for federal contracts there's like FedBizGov and these other databases that actually will give you copies of contracts, because we're all taxpayers, or like like anything that comes from taxpayer monies, it should be available to us through a FOIA or other transparency process.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, everyone. This has been both enlightening and stressful at the same time.
As everything these days. So I think we have time for 2 more questions. I want to give everyone a chance to share. This is my cat chat training. Amanda Reinhardt, you had a question, and then we'll hear from Amy about the iSchool, and then we'll say our goodbyes. Go ahead, Amanda.
I think my question actually was answered earlier.
Oh, okay. You had a question about library gathered data as a risk to be managed?
Yeah, I was just thinking what motivates my university. And I think Professor Lamdan responded with the information about the shareholders for these companies, kind of following the same line. So I have a note to look into that. Thank you so much.
Okay, sounds fun. All right, Amy, we'll give you the last question. We can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, thanks for the talk. I work on a campus with an iSchool. I don't know how true that is for the rest of you, but I noticed just through job postings and search announcements and so on that we've apparently been pursuing lots of partnerships with criminology departments on our campus and beyond. And I'm wondering if folks on the call, including Professor Lamdan, know whether and how like information studies researchers are also contributing to how the various companies profiled today, like how information studies researchers are embedded in that that cycle, that infrastructure, and helping make it more like easier and more seamless for the data to move in these different ways.
That's a really good question. Does anybody know, has anybody worked in any of these companies, or know if there's like a three-way between information science schools and iSchools and these companies?
I feel like UCLA, there's some study about surveillance and police. They got a big grant for it. And I know that Syracuse, Snowden had a project about that. I mean, I think that they have money. It makes me worry about just to insert myself here at the end, given that public sector funding is going to go like that, and billionaires and the things that they own are going to go like that, that there will be a lot of interest in making those kinds of connections, right? To, if you can get a grant from Elsevier that you couldn't get from the state, I don't know. But I might be going off the deep end. I did, Elvis let me know that Jordan had a question. So Jordan, if you're still here, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, I was just typing it out in the chat there, but
I love that Canada sound, Jordan. Go ahead.
I see a lot of parallels that I didn't really expect with support for open source software in situations where the proprietary, and in this case, very entrenched with law enforcement solution is like the default. So, but Cindy said it so well earlier, we're not going to see truly we're not going to see true adoption in a new future of more equitable platforms until we have the investment from our own institutions in terms of tenure and promotion, recognizing the labor that goes into sustaining them for academic communities.
Yep, I actually that is something that I've been thinking a lot about. That's actually what I'm kind of researching and like focusing on right now. It's the invisible labor of universities that gives all of this power and financial gain to these gigantic corporations, especially like the Reed Elsevier's of the RELX. Yeah, so our labor and labor of our institutions subsidizes this policing in a sense.
What a cheerful note to end on, Professor Lamdan. And we're at time, and I just want to thank you so much. I learned so much. My mind is blowing. I hope that's true for a bunch of other people on the call. It's just like lots and lots to think about. So I want to say thank you very much. And I can't believe, Ismalia, that you're here. Hi. Anyway, so thank you so much. And Elvis, if you want to say some closing words.
Sure, just a big thank you again. And thank you to everyone for making this a really lively and interactive conversation. That doesn't always happen on Zoom. And I think that was really great. I like the sort of visceral shock and awe responses that we got in the chat. So yeah, thank you everyone. And stay tuned for the next conversation series. We also have Alison Macrina from the Library Freedom Project coming up on August 20th. So mark your calendars, 1 p.m. We'll be here. Hopefully you will join us as well. So thank you. And with that, I think over and out.
Okay, thanks everybody. See you next time.
Right.
Bye.